In June of 2013, 18-year-old Paul Young traveled to Grand Teton National Park to capture the beauty of the mountains for his YouTube channel. He was supposed to return home with new content, but instead disappeared without a trace into the heart of the wilderness. Only 5 years later, his GoPro camera was accidentally found in a deep crevice of Death Canyon with a shocking last photo that changed the course of the entire investigation. You will find out who Paul met on his way to that fateful moment and what terrible secret the mountains had been hiding for more than 5 years in this video. The events in this story are presented as a narrative interpretation. Some elements have been altered or recreated for storytelling purposes. On June 20th, 2013, at 8:30 in the morning, 18-year-old Paul Young's silver SUV crossed the border into Grand Teton National Park. The young man, described by friends and family as an extremely energetic and ambitious person, arrived at the reserve with a clear goal in mind: to shoot professional content for his rapidly gaining popularity YouTube channel. According to his parents, Mary and Richard Young, Paul never took hiking lightly. He was the rare type of young man who studies topographic maps for hours and checks his equipment long before setting out on a hike. That morning, he had a full set of equipment with him: a basic DSLR camera for landscape shots and a handheld GoPro camera designed to capture the most extreme moments of the journey. His navy blue backpack weighed about 40 pounds and contained everything he needed to survive off-grid for 2 days, from water filters to spare batteries. At 9:15 in the morning, Paul checked in at the visitor center, specifying the endpoint of the route as Cascade Canyon, a place known for its majestic views and sudden changes in weather. The ranger who issued the wilderness permit later noted in an official report that the young man seemed well prepared and showed no anxiety. On the contrary, he asked in detail about the condition of the trails after the recent rainstorms. The trail to the Cascade Canyon runs through dense forests and rocky scree, where the air is always saturated with humidity, and the sounds of footsteps are absorbed by soft moss. Paul had promised his parents to get in touch on June 22, no later than 20 o'clock in the evening. But when the deadline passed and his phone remained out of reach, Mary and Richard turned to the police. The search operation began immediately. Within 3 hours, the rescuers found Paul's car in a parking lot near the trailhead. The car was locked, and inside the back seat was a printed map of the park with the boy's personal notes. This confirmed that he had gone to the mountains as planned. 20 professional rangers and more than 40 volunteers were involved in the search, forming chains to comb the area. 6 hours after the active phase of the operation began, one of the groups came across the first disturbing discovery. On a large gray boulder 2 feet from the official trail in Cascade Canyon was his main professional camera. The device was turned off, and there were no signs of bumps or damage to the body, which looked extremely strange for an experienced hiker to leave such an expensive item in the middle of the forest. The absence of Paul himself and his second GoPro camera led detectives to assume that an event had occurred that forced the boy to act in haste. In her testimony, Paul's mother, Mary, recalled through tears how proud her son was of this equipment and would never leave it unattended. Richard Young was personally involved in every stage of the search, refusing to rest. He and the rescuers descended into the gorges and checked the shores of Taggart Lake, where the boy could theoretically be. Search teams searched more than 10 square miles around the location of the camera, using helicopters with thermal sensors, but no sign of a living person was detected. Investigators carefully examined the area around the boulder, looking for signs of a struggle, bloodstains, or scraps of clothing, but the ground was untouched and the branches of the surrounding shrubbery were not broken. This created the illusion that Paul Young had simply vanished into thin air just a few miles away from the crowded tourist viewing platforms. The situation was complicated by the fact that the Cascade Canyon area is home to a significant population of grizzlies, but no signs of a predator attack were found. A large-scale search lasted for 10 days but yielded no results except for an increased sense of mystery and anxiety. The police recorded that the last signal from Paul's cell phone was beaconed at 11 o'clock, 40 minutes in the morning on the day of his disappearance, after which the device was turned off or malfunctioned. For Mary Young, every day of waiting turned into endless torture. She recalled that Paul was full of vitality and plans for the future, which categorically ruled out the version of suicide or voluntary disappearance. Detectives began to consider the possibility of a criminal overtone, as an experienced 18-year-old could not simply get lost on a well-marked trail on a sunny day. However, the absence of a body or any material evidence brought the investigation to a standstill, leaving the parents alone with their grief and endless questions to which Grand Teton remained silent. Exactly 5 years have passed since Paul Young's name was officially listed as missing in Grand Teton National Park, and his case has become one of the most depressing and unsolvable mysteries in the state of Wyoming. On May 15, 2018, at 14 hours and 30 minutes, a group of 4 experienced hikers exploring the remote and wild areas of Death Canyon deviated from the main route in search of a better angle for panoramic photography. Death Canyon is known for its gloomy name and treacherous terrain, where steep granite walls rise hundreds of feet and deep shadows create the illusion of constant twilight even on a sunny afternoon. This is a place where the eerie silence of the rocks is interrupted only by the distant roar of cave-ins, and where every step on slippery stones requires maximum concentration. While descending along a narrow rocky ledge, often called the Path of Despair by local guides because of its steepness, one of the travelers noticed a foreign object glinting in a narrow, deep crevice between 2 massive blocks of sandstone. It was a small, portable GoPro camera that had been exposed to the elements for 60 months, subjected to the ravages of the harsh, high-altitude climate, where summer heat is followed by gale-force winds and many feet of snow in winter. The device was in critical condition. The plastic case had completely faded under harsh UV radiation, turning an unnatural dirty gray hue, was covered with deep, random scratches from a likely fall on sharp rocks, and was densely packed with a layer of dry, petrified dirt that almost completely blocked access to the connectors. The tourists, who at the time were unaware of the large-scale criminal implications of their discovery, initially assumed that the owner had simply dropped the camera during the last season and had no idea that they were holding the key to solving a tragedy 5 years ago. Returning to their temporary camp that evening at 21st hour 45 minutes, they carefully removed the memory card with special tools and tried to view the contents on a laptop, hoping to find at least some coordinates of the owner. However, the first recovered files that appeared on the screen plunged the group into a state of numbness. They were not the usual footage of a happy vacation, but rather a chronicle of growing anxiety that forced the witnesses to immediately contact the Teton County Sheriff's Office the next morning at 7 o'clock 20 minutes. When Detective Jackson, who remembered the search for Young from his internship days, arrived at the rendezvous point and ran a preliminary check of the device's serial number, the results were startling. It was the exact GoPro camera that 18-year-old Paul had taken on his last hike. The geographical anomaly of this discovery was simply impossible from the point of view of the usual logic of an accident. The crevasse in Death Canyon was located 8 miles from the boulder in Cascade Canyon, where the boys' first camera was found in June 2013. In the wilds of the Grand Tetons, 8 miles through passes littered with fallen trees and sharp rocks is a journey that requires a full day of grueling walking, even for a trained athlete. This meant that Paul Young didn't just stumble and fall. He was either running in panicked terror from pursuers, ignoring all marked trails and common sense, or someone deliberately moved the device many miles from the original incident in an attempt to confuse the investigation and hide evidence in the most inaccessible area of the park. Detectives, who for years had considered the case to be hopeless archive file number 2013 PIVI, have reopened the investigation, but now it has officially changed its status from missing person to suspected violent crime. Death Canyon, which was previously seen only as a remote point on the map, has now become the epicenter of new investigative efforts, where every stone could hide the remains of equipment or traces of a struggle. Investigators noted that the condition of the memory card allowed them to restore some of the deleted records, and this gave them a vague hope of hearing the voices of those who saw Paul last. The boy's parents, Mary and Richard Young, arrived at the sheriff's department at 13 o'clock 10 minutes, feeling the old wound tearing open with new force. Mary later recalled that the news of the found camera brought not relief, but even more fear, because now they had to find out what hell their son went through before the end. The police forensic experts began to defragment the memory sectors step by step, trying to extract the images from under the layers of digital noise caused by prolonged exposure to the humid environment of the crevasse. Each recovered fragment was like a breath of cold air. Shots of calm mountain lakes were suddenly replaced by chaotic movements and blurred images, indicating that the camera was held with trembling hands or had captured the moment of the fall. Detective Jackson noted in his reports that the location of the GoPro 8 miles from Cascade Canyon completely refutes the version of a bear attack, because predators do not carry electronic devices over such distances and do not hide them deep in rock crevices. It was the work of a man who knew these mountains like the back of his hand and knew how to take advantage of their inaccessibility. The atmosphere in the sheriff's office was electrifying, as everyone realized that if even a few seconds of the last conflict were preserved on this memory card, the 5-year silence of Grand Teton would finally be broken. While the volunteers were preparing to recomb the Death Canyon area, digital analysts were working around the clock to reconstruct the chronology of that fateful day on June 22, 2013. The question of why Paul was so far away from his car and why he left his main expensive piece of equipment in a visible place now had a new, much more sinister context. Every scratch on the body of the recovered GoPro camera told of a desperate attempt to escape, and the fossilized dirt on the lens was like a mute witness to how a sunny day in the mountains had turned into a thriller whose ending had been hidden deep underground for 1,825 days. Now the investigation depended only on whether the technology of 2018 could defeat the destructive power of nature and human cruelty captured on a small piece of silicon. On May 18, 2018, at 9 o'clock in the morning, the 16-gigabyte microSD card taken from 18-year-old Paul Young's GoPro camera was officially delivered to the Cheyenne Digital Forensics Laboratory. Experts recorded significant corrosion damage to the metal contacts and microcracks on the plastic case, which were the result of the device's prolonged exposure to the humid environment of Death Canyon for 1,825 days. According to the technical protocol, the card was subjected to a delicate cleaning procedure in an ultrasonic bath before being read, and then placed in a specialized reader to restore damaged memory sectors. The process of defragmenting and stabilizing the digital signal took more than 72 hours, as the files had numerous tears and digital artifacts. The first successfully recovered video footage was dated June 22, 2013, the day Paul Young stopped contacting his parents. The beginning of the videos was completely peaceful and documentary in nature. At 11 o'clock 45 in the morning, the camera attached to the boy's chest mount captured majestic panoramas of the Grand Teton mountain range. Paul, whose voice on the recording sounded confident and calm, spoke in detail about the geological origin of the granite rocks and the peculiarities of the formation of glacial lakes in the Cascade Canyon area. The video shows how he professionally uses a tripod and makes panoramic shots, trying to capture every detail of the surrounding landscape. However, at 13 hours and 12 minutes, the atmosphere of the report changed dramatically. The camera captured the moment when Paul suddenly stopped in the middle of a path surrounded by dense pine trees. At that moment, in the background, at a distance of about 30 feet, strange sounds became distinctly audible, breaking the eerie silence of the forest. According to the reconstruction of the audio recording, these were rough male voices that sounded distinctly dissatisfied and irritated. The video shows Paul breathing faster and the camera lens jerking randomly left and right as he tries to see the source of the noise through the dense tree branches. As the unknown men approached, the tone of the conversation became aggressive. According to the experts who analyzed the soundtrack, the strangers began to make claims about the filming. Paul, whose face was caught in the glare of the protective glass of the box for a few seconds, looked extremely agitated. His pupils were dilated, large drops of sweat appeared on his forehead, and his lower lip was trembling slightly. The guy began to make excuses, explaining that he had no intention of filming people and was only interested in the scenery for his channel. The video shows him slowly stepping back, holding his hands in an open gesture. According to the reconstruction of the dialogue, Paul said that he did not see anything, did not film anyone, and was about to leave. However, the unknown persons, identified in the recording as at least 2 or 3 men, continued to close the distance. At this point, forensic experts found signs of deliberate damage to the digital files as the image began to overlap with large pixel squares just as the conversation turned to shouting. At 13 hours and 15 minutes into the recording, a sharp crunch of dry twigs and the sound of fast running can be heard. The camera chaotically captured fragments of rocks and tree roots under Paul's feet as he desperately tried to escape from the main path deeper into the thicket. The last 2 minutes of the video are a continuous recording of the boy's heavy, raspy breathing and the sounds of pursuit. One of the pursuers could be heard shouting curses, demanding that he stop. At the 17th minute of the last file, there was a sharp sound of a dull thud, after which the camera fell to the ground. The lens captured a still fragment of the sky, which began to be covered by heavy clouds, before the recording finally ended at 13 hours and 17 minutes. The police received irrefutable evidence that the conflict was physical and deliberate. These men were the last people to see 18-year-old Paul Young alive within a few yards. The analysis of the damaged memory card completely changed the direction of the investigation, confirming that Paul was not a victim of wildlife, but faced a real threat that was hiding among the centuries-old trees of Grand Teton. Dear viewers, before we continue to delve into the grim details of this investigation, I sincerely ask you to subscribe to my channel, leave a detailed comment below this video, and be sure to like it. Your engagement is critical to YouTube's algorithms, as it is through your support that the system will begin to actively promote this content, allowing Paul's story to reach a much wider audience and possibly help us find new clues in our search for the truth, as publicity is the most powerful weapon against oblivion. Detective Jackson, a regular employee of the Teton County Sheriff's Office, who remembered the Paul Young case well from his professional training in 2013, took on the thorough and exhaustive analysis of the archival materials on his own. In an archive room where the air was saturated with the smell of old paper and dust, he spent long hours under flickering fluorescent lights, flipping through thousands of pages of handwritten reports. His investigation centered on a meticulous examination of visitor entry logs to Grand Teton National Park and registration cards at campgrounds immediately surrounding Cascade Canyon. By accurately delineating the territorial perimeter based on the time of the last video on the damaged camera, 13 hours and 17 minutes on June 22, 2013, he was able to identify a specific group of young men who had rented site number 18 for recreation on that fateful day, not far from the boys' route. 3 people were officially suspected by the investigation: Stephen Allen, Mark Walker, and Donald Hall. In 2013, the 3 were well known among local rangers as a problematic group, about whom complaints were repeatedly received from other vacationers during that week. According to an elderly couple from Idaho who were staying at a nearby site, The young men were acting defiantly, ignoring fire safety rules, playing loud music at full volume, and consuming large amounts of hard liquor, accompanied by shouting that echoed throughout the canyon. Detective Jackson discovered a critical detail in the department's internal archives. One of the men, Stephen Allen, had 3 prior police citations for violent bar fights in a neighboring county, indicating a tendency toward unmotivated aggression and uncontrollable rage. This information became the very clue that allowed the sheriff's office to radically change the main version of the case from a tragic accident to a targeted case of enforced disappearance of an 18-year-old boy. The distance from their temporary camp to the place where Paul's first professional camera was later found on a boulder was less than 1 mile, and the area of Cascade Canyon in that area narrows so much that any encounter in the silence of the wild forest becomes almost inevitable. Jackson methodically studied each of the rangers' notes, realizing that the tense atmosphere within Allen's company, fueled by alcohol, could have been the trigger for a fatal conflict with a young blogger who happened to be near his equipment. One of the rangers who made his rounds at 16 o'clock that day noted in his notebook that the young men seemed unusually focused and quiet, in stark contrast to their previous noisy behavior. Documentary accuracy of the records at the park's checkout point indicated that Allen, Walker, and Hall left Grand Teton in a silver pickup truck at 18 hours and 45 minutes, 8 hours ahead of schedule, without providing any explanation to the visitor center staff at the checkout. This fact of hasty flight became a key clue for detectives, who now saw ordinary tourists as potential criminals who could have been involved in the tragedy that played out among the rocks 8 miles from their official camp. Detective Jackson noted in his report that Stephen Allen's psychological profile fit perfectly with the description of a person capable of sudden outbursts of violence over a trivial matter, such as unwanted photography. An examination of the phone connections, although limited by the capabilities of the technology of previous years, showed that the suspect's devices were active in the coverage area of the tower, serving the entrance to the canyon until the moment they left. Every detail, from complaints about noise to Allen's criminal past, formed a single logical line that indicated that Paul Young hadn't just disappeared. He had met with people who were used to resolving conflicts by force. Jackson realized that without a body, the case was still shaky, but he now had the names of those whose voices could be recorded on the damaged GoPro memory card. The atmosphere in the sheriff's office grew increasingly tense as the circle of suspects closed around 3 people whose presence in the mountains that day no longer seemed like a coincidence. The investigation began preparations for the first official interrogations, hoping that after 5 years, one of the 3 would show weakness and tell the truth about why the 18-year-old was forced to flee deep into Death Canyon, leaving behind only digital traces of his fear. On May 25, 2018, at 9:45 in the morning, detectives from the Teton County Sheriff's Office began a series of coordinated interviews that would shed light on the events of 5 years ago. Stephen Allen, Mark Walker, and Donald Hall were taken to the station by force as they refused to cooperate with the investigation voluntarily. Stephen Allen was the first to enter interrogation room number 4, where harsh fluorescent light and severe stuffiness prevailed. Detective Jackson later noted in his official notes that Allen greeted the police with an undisguised, almost physical hostility. His face resembled a stone mask, and his jaws were so tightly clenched that the veins in his temples throbbed at every mention of June 2013. He stared at a single point on the metal table, refusing to answer most questions, and only occasionally referring to the fact that in 5 years he had completely forgotten the details of that campaign. However, the behavior of Mark Walker, who was interrogated in the next room at 10 o'clock and 30 minutes, was radically different. Walker was in a state of deep internal anxiety. He was constantly fingering the edge of his sweater, avoiding direct eye contact with the detectives, and breathing heavily, in stark contrast to the predatory calmness Jackson had observed in Allen and Hall. Walker looked like a man carrying a burden on his shoulders that was becoming heavier by the minute, and his trembling hands betrayed a fear that could not be hidden behind silence. At 12 o'clock 15 minutes, another team of operatives began an authorized search of the suspect's temporary residence, a small rental house on the outskirts of Jackson, 10 miles from the national park boundary. In the basement, hidden behind a massive wood panel, investigators discovered a professionally equipped stash house containing a significant amount of illicit drugs, as well as a digital scale and packaging materials. This discovery allowed the investigation to put forward a key version of the motive. 18-year-old Paul Young, while filming his panoramas in a remote part of the canyon, could have accidentally filmed the moment of illegal transfer or the place of storage of these substances, which became a fatal trigger for further events. During his interrogation, which began at 14 o'clock sharp, Donald Hall initially acted extremely defiant, leaning back and making sarcastic remarks about the police. But his confidence instantly vanished and his face broke out in a cold sweat as Detective Jackson laid out his cell phone billing printouts for June 2013 in front of him. Satellite tracking data showed that the phones of all three suspects were active in the heart of Death Canyon, the very place where the GoPro camera was found 8 miles off the official trail, within 4 hours of the conflict, captured on video. The most shocking fact that emerged from the digital footprint analysis was that Stephen Allen had been subscribed to Paul Young's YouTube channel for months before the tragedy. This indicated that during the meeting in the woods, Allen could consciously recognize the victim, realizing that he was not just a random tourist, but a person whose content was viewed by thousands of people and whose recordings could become irrefutable evidence of their criminal activities. The tension in the room became almost physically palpable at 16 hours and 40 minutes, when the suspects were presented with the facts of their direct presence in the perimeter of the boys' disappearance. Despite the obvious evidence and differences in emotional reactions, all three men chose a single defense tactic. They continued to categorically deny any physical contact with Paul Young. They claimed that they were heavily intoxicated that day, which allegedly caused deep blackouts lasting several hours. Allen kept repeating in a cold voice that they were just having a rest, and that any coincidences with the missing boy's route were just an unfortunate accident that could not be proven after all this time. Investigators recorded that none of the suspects expressed any sympathy for the Young family. Instead, they were more concerned about the legal consequences of the drugs found in the basement. This was documentary evidence of a complete lack of empathy, which only strengthened Jackson's conviction that they were involved in something much worse. The search lasted until late in the evening, and every item found in Allen's house showed that this group of people lived by their own brutal rules, where human life mattered less than the preservation of their illegal business. The police realized that the wall of silence built by Allen was extremely strong, but the first cracks in Walker's behavior gave hope that the truth, hidden for 1,825 days, would finally come to the surface of the Rocky Canyons. At 20 past 10, the interrogations were officially suspended, but the detectives already had enough information to understand. Paul Young was targeted not because of an accident, but because of his professional passion and the wrong time to press the record button on his camera. On May 28, 2018, at 10:30 in the morning, the final phase of the recovery of graphic files from Paul Young's damaged memory card was officially completed at the Cheyenne Digital Forensics Laboratory. Experts focused on the last 10 seconds of the camera's life, which were previously thought to be irretrievably lost due to critical recording errors and physical degradation of memory sectors after 5 years in the crevasse. It was not just digital data, but a pixelated chronicle of a desperate struggle for survival in one of the harshest areas of Grand Teton. The first 3 recovered photos that appeared on the experts' monitors showed 18-year-old Paul Young running through dense undergrowth. The background had turned into a continuous smeared strip of dark green and gray, indicating the extremely high speed of the movement and the chaotic swinging of the camera on the chest mount. The GoPro lens managed to capture sharp granite fragments, twisted roots of centuries-old pine trees, and whipping branches of shrubs that, judging by the angle, were hitting the guy in the arms. This was no ordinary run of a traveler hurrying to the camp. It was the escape of a person on the verge of physical exhaustion and deep psychological horror. On the fourth frame of the series, which was partially stabilized using specialized algorithms to increase clarity, detectives noticed the most eerie detail that changed the course of the entire investigation. In the upper right corner of the image, a clear image of a human hand in a dark tactical glove appeared, which in a rapid movement tried to grab the guy's shoulder. The next shot, captured just 0.5 of a second later, showed part of a foot in a massive hiking boot crossing Paul's path, creating an obstacle on a narrow rocky shelf above the precipice. Due to the intense dynamic blur and the critical lack of light under the dense tree canopy, it was technically impossible to identify the attacker's face, but the fact of aggressive physical pursuit became an indisputable document of the case. Detective Jackson, arriving at the sheriff's office at 12:45, spent hours watching the footage on a large screen, zooming in on each fragment to the point of digital noise. He tried to find at least some unique detail of clothing, shoe markings, or the distinctive shape of the stalker's glove that could link this image to the items found during the searches of Allen's house. The last image in the series of recovered data was the most static and therefore the most depressing. The camera was lying on the ground at an angle of approximately 30 degrees, its lens pointing vertically upward, capturing a small patch of overcast sky, which at the time was rapidly being drawn in by heavy leaden clouds. In this shot, there was no more movement, no more of Paul's heavy breathing, and no more shadows of the pursuers, only the absolute, dead infinity of nature, which became the only witness to the end. This photo of the sky from Death Canyon instantly became a symbol for the investigation of complete hopelessness and silence that lasted for 1,825 days in these mountains. Jackson methodically analyzed the direction of the light in the last frame, trying to determine the exact hour and azimuth from the position of the sun, which was barely breaking through the dense cloud cover of that June day in 2013. He was looking for any microscopic clue: a print in the muddy puddle next to the lens, the structure of the soil, or the direction of the crumpled grass that might indicate where the attackers had gone after the camera fell from its mount. In his mind, the detective built dozens of scenarios, trying to understand whether the 18-year-old boy had been taken from that spot by force, or whether he had tried to hide from the aggressors in one of the many crevices and simply failed to hold on to the granite wet after the rain and fell into a deep abyss where his body had remained unnoticed during all previous search operations. The last seconds of GoPro's digital life did not provide a clear picture of death, but they did provide the investigation with a documentary of a hunt, where the victim was a young man who simply wanted to capture the views of Grand Teton for his channel. Every pixel of this last image of the sky seemed to Jackson to be a silent cry for help that reached the addressee with a huge delay. Surveyors confirmed that the camera had not been moved by any external factor other than natural erosion since it hit the rocks, which meant that this particular geographic point within a few hundred feet was the location of Paul's last encounter with his pursuers. Tension in the sheriff's office reached its peak when the results of the analysis were officially added to case number 2013 Pi Vi. Jackson realized that without the physical discovery of Paul's remains, this photo of the sky would remain the only material evidence of the tragedy that unfolded at 13 hours, 17 minutes, 22 minutes on June 2013, leaving the boy's parents in endless anticipation of an answer that the mountains were in no hurry to hand over to justice. On June 5, 2018, at 10:15 in the morning, the atmosphere in the Teton County District Attorney's Office was tense, almost suffocating. Detective Jackson had laid out a detailed topographic map of Grand Teton National Park on a massive oak desk, with red markers indicating the likely trajectory of 18-year-old Paul Young and the points of his last encounter with Stephen Allen's group. The official working version of the investigation, formed on the basis of recovered digital data, the results of searches and mobile phone billing, looked logical and ruthless. According to the reconstruction of the events, Stephen Allen, Mark Walker, and Donald Hall intercepted Paul at the intersection of the Cascade Canyon trails at 13 hours 12 minutes past 22 on June 2013. Investigators were convinced that the young men's aggression was caused by a panicked fear of exposing their illegal activities. Paul, setting up his professional camera to take panoramic shots, could have accidentally captured the moment of transferring a large batch of illegal drugs that were later found in their shared hideout 5 years later. Detective Jackson assumed that the suspects had forcibly taken his main DSLR camera from him, leaving it in plain sight as a distraction to throw rescuers off the scent, and that Paul himself had been forced to move deep into the rocky and extremely dangerous area of Death Canyon, threatening him with physical violence. Located 8 miles from major hiking trails, the area is characterized by nearly vertical granite walls over 2,000 feet high and a maze of deep crevasses where even experienced rangers avoid single passages. Investigators believe that Allen and company intended to intimidate the boy into handing over or deleting the footage from the portable GoPro camera that remained strapped to his body during his escape. However, this slender version, backed by psychological portraits of the suspects, instantly ran into an unyielding and cold legal wall. The main argument of the prosecution was the absence of a body, which in the legal practice of the United States makes a murder case virtually impossible to prove in a jury. No body means no confirmed fact of death, and therefore no crime under the article on the deprivation of life. The suspects' lawyers, in particular Thomas Bradley, known for his aggressive defense tactics, methodically broke down every piece of circumstantial evidence of the investigation during the preliminary closed hearing at 13 hours 45 minutes on the same day. They insisted that the location of the camera 8 miles away from the first incident site was only a coincidence or the result of Paul's own actions. The defense argued that the 18-year-old could have simply panicked when he saw a wild animal, such as a grizzly bear, from afar, and, in a state of affect, rushed in the other direction, throwing the equipment into the crevasse so that it would not interfere with his running down the steep slopes. Even the fact that one of the shots showed a gloved hand, the lawyers called it a speculative digital illusion, claiming that due to the blurring, it was impossible to identify the hand as belonging to Stephen Allen or any other member of the group. The investigation found itself in a situation where every piece of physical evidence had been damaged by time. 5 years of rain, snow, and temperature changes had destroyed any biological traces, DNA, or fingerprints on the camera body that could have provided direct evidence of physical contact. Despite the fact that Mark Walker showed signs of deep anxiety during interrogations and Stephen Allen demonstrated open hostility, the law did not allow them to be held in custody on suspicion of a serious crime without the main evidence, the victim's remains. The district attorney officially told Detective Jackson at 16 hours and 20 minutes that the case was based solely on speculation and digital artifacts that the defense could easily turn in the defendant's favor before trial. As a result, Stephen Allen was only remanded in custody on charges of possession and distribution of illegal substances, which provided for a real term, but had nothing to do with the fate of the missing boy. Mark Walker and Donald Hall had to be released on bail in the amount of $50,000 just 48 hours after their arrest. Paul's parents, Mary and Richard Young, who had been waiting outside the sheriff's office since 7 in the morning, received the news with distinct pain and despair. Richard later said in his press testimony that the justice system was powerless against the silence of the mountains and the cunning of the criminals. The legal wall seemed impenetrable. The law required physical facts that Grand Teton had reliably concealed for 1,825 days. Investigators realized that Death Canyon had become a natural safe that reliably kept the secret of Paul's last moments, and no digital record could replace the results of a forensic examination of the remains. Jackson's every attempt to find new witnesses among the tourists who were in the park in June 2013 ended in nothing, as people's memories faded, just like the colors on the body of the camera he found. The atmosphere in the department was depressing. The detectives realized that the GoPro had told them a story of a hunt where the victim was a young man, but justice demanded a body that was not in any search or search operation protocol. The case began to slow down again, turning into another cold file, and Stephen Allen, sitting in a pretrial detention center, maintained his stony silence, knowing that without the main piece of evidence, he remained only a trafficker in illegal substances, not the killer of 18-year-old Paul Young. The police were forced to admit their temporary defeat in the face of the granite cliffs that, 8 miles from the trailhead, safely buried the truth, leaving the family with only a photograph of a cloudy sky as the final point in this unfinished story. Several more grueling months have passed since the last fragments of digital data from the damaged memory card were officially added to the investigation, but the case of 18-year-old Paul Young has not been able to cross the fatal line between reasonable suspicion and a final murder conviction. There is a depressing sense of stagnation in the corridors of the Teton County Sheriff's Office as each new investigation hits the same legal wall that the suspect's defense team has built around their clients. The boy's body has still not been found, and Grand Teton continues to keep its dark secret under layers of granite, eternal ice, and thick moss that have been absorbing any trace of human presence for years. The GoPro camera, found 8 miles from the original search area, was the only material witness to the events of June 22, 2013, but it only recorded the beginning of the end, leaving the ending behind. The analysis of the topographic anomaly of the site confirmed the detectives' assumptions. Paul Young ended up in that remote crevice of Death Canyon, not because of a mistake in orientation, but because he was running in panic in that direction, trying to find salvation among the rocks that seemed to him a safe haven from his pursuers. The reason why the device was not found during a large-scale operation in 2013 was both simple and tragic. The location was far beyond the radius that human logic and rescue protocols would allow for an exhausted person to hike in the wild. Every mile of this journey through fallen trees and sharp rocky scree was a test for the 18-year-old, which he passed, holding in his hands his last chance to prove the truth. Stephen Allen did receive his sentence, but justice caught up with him, not for taking the life of a young blogger, but for possession and distribution of illegal substances found in a cache during a search. He is serving his sentence in state prison, maintaining the same stony silence and predatory confidence with which he met detectives on the first day of interrogation. His face remains unmoved at every mention of Paul's name, and his lawyers continue to block any attempts by the investigation to link Allen's drug business to the man's disappearance. Mark Walker and Donald Hall continue to live their normal lives, although an invisible shadow of suspicion and public condemnation has forever fallen over their names, turning them into outcasts in their own community. Every step they take in the city is accompanied by heavy stares from people who remember the details of the recovered video, where voices similar to theirs demanded that the boy hand over the camera. At the same time, Mary and Richard Young come to Grand Teton National Park every year on June 22nd, staying at the same hotel where their son once stayed. They stand for hours on the Cascade Canyon observation deck, gazing at the same majestic peaks that Paul so passionately wanted to capture for his channel. Mary often holds a copy of the last sky photo she managed to get out of her camera, believing that one day the mountains will be merciful and show them the way to their only child's final resting place. Detective Jackson, passing by the archive shelf every morning, involuntarily stops every time at a thick folder labeled 2013 PI-VI. He knows every pixel in the recovered footage, remembers every intermittent breath Paul took on the recording, and is firmly convinced that somewhere out there, among the rocky labyrinths of Death Canyon, there is still a clue that the wilderness is not yet ready to bring to justice. The case remains open, and Paul Young will forever be an 18-year-old boy with ambitions and a camera in his hands, whose last look was directed at the endless Wyoming sky, covered by heavy leaden clouds. Every new group of hikers passing through the Cascade Canyon Trail now involuntarily looks back at the lonely gray boulder, remembering the story of the blogger whose disappearance became the loudest silence in the park's history over the past decade. Grand Teton remains majestic and indifferent, safely hiding under its slopes, the chronicle of a day when digital memory proved stronger than human oblivion, but weaker than the legal system that separated truth and punishment for years to come. And as long as folder number 2013 PI-VI is on Jackson's desk, the investigation is not considered complete, because nothing disappears without a trace in these mountains. It is only waiting for its time to be found in another random crevasse by the next generation of travelers. The story of Paul Young has become not only a tragedy of one family, but also a stark reminder that wildlife sometimes becomes an unwitting accomplice to human cruelty, keeping secrets whose price is 1,825 days of endless waiting and one photograph of a gray sky. The case remains open, waiting for the day when the last piece of the puzzle falls from the rocky walls of Death Canyon to put the final point in this documentary thriller.